Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today we are going to be talking about cloud detection and response for M365 and Azure. Before we start, I need to get a bit of housekeeping out of the way. You've probably noticed by now that this webinar platform has a few widgets. The most important one, apart from the slides I'm about to present, are the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand side of your window. Here you can send in your questions and we will review these questions at the end of the webinar. Please notice the resource list containing some hopefully interesting links and the survey section is also at the bottom of your screen. And we would also appreciate it if you took time before leaving today to take the survey. With all that being said, let's start. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Martin Baker and I'm one of the Senior Security Consulting Analysts at Vectra AI. Myself and my colleagues are responsible for delivering the Vectra MDR service. We have contact on a regular basis with Vectra customers that help them get the most out of the platform. And due to having a large customer base subscribing to MDR and M365, myself and my colleagues gain a number of insights into the type of detections that indicate potentially damaging activities occurring within a customer cloud platform. So some of these experiences is what I'm going to share with you today. We will start off today's webinar by talking about what cloud detection and response actually is. We will then talk about which indicators and detections highlight potentially unauthorized access and privilege misuse, and how to effectively respond to these detections. And finally, to wrap things up, I will answer as many questions as possible that you have sent through to the Q&A areas of this webinar. So before we discuss specific activities that an attacker may perform or an analyst may need to perform in their environment, we need to talk about what cloud detection and response is. So what is cloud detection and response? So cloud detection and response enables security teams to defend their cloud applications and infrastructure from unauthorized access and privilege misuse. Cloud detection and response enables analysts and security operations team a visibility enabling them to detect and investigate to respond to threats within their environment. To cover this, we will cover each area in greater detail, but in short, this is performed by detect, and this is the ability for analysts or security teams to be made aware that activity has occurred or is currently taking place within their environment. We then have investigate. This area will review the activities or actions that have been observed within the detections and events. And finally, respond. Once we have investigated detections and events that have been alerted to us, this is the action we will take mitigating the activity that has been observed. So looking into these areas in greater detail, we will first look at the detect element. By definition, the word detect is the action or process of identifying the presence or something concealed, or the fact of noticing or observing something. Now, detections within Vectra are the basis of incidents and indicate the potential occurrence of malicious or suspicious activity in an environment. So detections are typically part of a broader attack and provide clues about an incident. So we're going to look at a list shortly, and we can see that we have multiple detections. So firstly, we have detections for command and control, or C2 for short. And this is where a host, or in these cases, an account, has accessed when it appears to be under control of an external entity. The account may be manually controlled from the outside, and this is the most threatening case and makes it highly likely that this is a targeted attack. Then we have reconnaissance. So reconnaissance are detections that will alert for after an account has been mapping inside of your cloud environment. Following on from there, we have lateral movement, and these will alert for scenarios or lateral action, meaning to further a target attack. And this can involve attempts to steal account credentials or compromising another account to make the attacker's foothold more durable or to get closer to a target. And exfiltration. And this covers scenarios where data is being sent outside or collected in a way meant to hide the data transfer. For an example, an attacker may forward mailboxes to an external mailbox. And finally, we have info detections, and these are, as the name would suggest, informational detections. But we're going to cover two of these detections later on. So, as many of you have previously seen, detections appear in the platform and have a threat uncertainty score. Detections are associated with accounts, and the scoring of the account will place it in one of the four quadrants: the low, the medium, the high, or the critical. But this depends on the detection type and also the number of detections that are observed. Now, within the Detect for Networks platform, to search explicitly for M365 and Azure detections, we can perform a search. Now, this is basic or advanced, and we need to search for the detection type M365 and or Azure. Or alternatively, we can select the sensor from the sensors list. Now, this will display all of the detections related to M365 and Azure activity. However, focusing on their accounts and their detections will indicate potential account compromise faster than examining 15 or 20 individual detections, as opposed to looking at 3 or 4 accounts. Now, I'm going to introduce you to the SaaS UI, which some of you may not have seen before. However, this UI operates in a little different way to the Detect for Networks UI. I'm going to run over a few of the features within the SaaS platform over the next few slides. Now, the first obvious areas of change are the drop-down boxes you may notice. This is because the SaaS platform, is only looking for SaaS activity, and the options are reduced. Now, within the platform, we can search for detection types related to M365, Azure, or all of the detections that have been observed by leaving the search field blank. Now, detections are displayed with the threat uncertainty score, as we've previously seen. So the next area of the SaaS UI I'm going to introduce you to is the Chaos dashboard. Now, this dashboard is broken up into several areas, and I'm going to cover these now. First, we have the time range that we can see, and this is how far back we're going to go. So we have the ability to see the last 24 hours, 7 days, or 14 days. Now, increasing the time range will increase the number of events that have been observed, the total logins and notable access events, and the access detections. We then have the tenant that we're going to be investigating. Now, customers with multiple tenants or sensors will have them listed in the drop-down box being highlighted. Now, looking at the notable events section, we can have a high-level overview of events. Now, these don't necessarily mean that a detection has triggered, rather a collection of events. For example, we can see in this example that we have a large number of Azure logins without two-factor authentication. And we can see the number of accounts that have been performed in this activity, as well as the number per account. Now, changing the time range will likely change the number of events observed. However, if the results remain the same for a 24-hour and 1-week period, this could highlight that there has been a configuration change, for example, MFA disabled, very recently. Now, continuing with the Chaos dashboard, we're going to look at the right-hand side of the page. So looking at the Azure AD access detections. So this is going to highlight detections that have been observed in the platform. Now, increasing the time range will likely increase the number of detections that have triggered. So from this page, we are able to see the detections of interest, and this will open a new window when the hyperlink is selected. Now, with the active detections within that category displayed, we're able to pivot from the Chaos dashboard to the detection page, and it will give the analyst the ability to identify upticks in Azure AD access detections. So something I briefly mentioned earlier that is often overlooked until a scored detection puts the account into one of the quadrants, so the low, the medium, the high, or the critical, is the info detection category. And as I said earlier, the info detection category is an informational detection to give awareness. And these can give an insight into when activity has started on an account or a host. Now, we're concentrating on the accounts here. However, on the screen that we can see in front of us, we can see that we have two different info detections. The first one we will look at will be the Azure AD login attempt to disabled account. So we can see that we have approximately 98,000 login attempts that have been observed to the M365 account over a relatively short period, in this case 5 days. Now, there may be many reasons why this activity may be occurring, both suspicious and also legitimate reasons. But we can see that multiple user agents have been observed. So we need to ask ourselves, why have these happened? Has there been a configuration change? Or is there potentially a wider issue and there are multiple threat actors attempting to gain access to this account, which in this case is disabled? So the next one we're going to look at, the info detection, will be the Azure AD brute force attempt. Again, we can see that a large number of attempts have been made to an active account. In this case, we have approximately 443,000 attempts from multiple IP addresses observed over a similar period to what we observed in the previous Azure AD login attempt to disabled account. Now, these may or may not be related, but with such large volumes, it's advisable to see why this activity is being observed. So info detections will not occur into the quadrants until a scored detection has triggered. So we're now going to look at how to investigate detections in alerts and the different tools that are available to us in the platforms. Now, the next few slides, I will cover just a few ways to investigate this activity. And remember that there are multiple ways for investigations to be performed. Different customers and different departments have multiple tools available to us. However, once the detection or an event has been observed, analysts and security teams need to investigate the activity. And investigations can take many forms, but again, I will point out a few of the stages. So when we're investigating a detection within the Detect for Networks or the SaaS UI, we will normally open the account and review all of the detections associated with the user, or we will open up individual detections. But before we investigate any detection within the platform, we need to understand why the detection has triggered in the first place. Now, each scored detection within the platform, we will have the ability to gain further understanding why this has triggered. Now, as a high-level overview, why this is triggered, some possible not root causes may actually indicate to us. However, we can see the detection and understand why the detection is triggered. And we also have the ability within a detection to see the detection type and category. We also have this question mark that's available to us. Once clicking on this, we will have a pop-up window. Within this pop-up window, we will be displayed multiple bits of information. Now, this can be a high-level overview as to why this is triggered. We've got some possible root causes. Now, these may include malicious, suspicious, and potentially unauthorized causes. We'll also highlight the potential business impacts as well as steps to verify the activity that's been observed. Now, when looking at a detection for account, the facility that is often overlooked is the additional information. So this is where we're going to get this information. So the first one we're going to look at here is the Detect for Networks platform. Now, looking at this account that we can see, we've observed that there are a large number of detections that have triggered. Well, in total, we have 9 detections that have triggered in a very short period of time. In this case, approximately 1 hour. So, investigating these detections in Detect for Networks should not be unusual to people. However, we need to look at the activity that's been observed, when it occurred, and the other detections that have triggered. So expanding all of the detections for the account will provide additional context for the analyst. So we're able to look at the detections and we're trying to map what has actually caused these detections. We're looking for IP addresses, maybe user agents, user emails that have been observed. And also as well, we need to remember the first and last scene for this activity. We need to try and map and marry up any of the actions that have been observed by this account. And again, these could be suspicious, malicious, or authorized activity that has not been observed by this particular account. Now, moving on to investigations within the Azure detections for SaaS platform. Now, very similar to what we have seen in the Detect for Networks platform, we can see that we have the first scene and last scene that is observed on a particular account. And again, in the example, what we can see here within the SaaS platform, we can see that 9 detections have triggered in a very short space of time. Again, approximately 1 hour. So when investigating detections within the SaaS platform, we are presented with an additional investigation function. Now, expanding the detections within the account page, we actually get presented with an investigate this account 1 hour before and after the detection. Now, this will auto-populate the time for us when we move into the instant investigations page. The Instant Investigations page detections SaaS platform, we're presented with the ability to look into logs further. Now, we can access this in one of 2 ways. We can access this, as previously demonstrated, from the detection itself, or alternatively, we can go in to the Instant Investigations tab at the top. We're then presented with our time window that we're going to be selecting. Once this search has been conducted, we will then be presented with the logs available to us. Now, it's worth noting and remembering at this point that the log history is only available for up to 3 days. Now, I'm going to introduce you to another function within the SaaS platform, and this is the Investigate page. Now, the Investigate page can be found on the left-hand tabs, again, within the SaaS platform. Once selected, we're then presented with an investigate page. First of all, we need to select our Azure AD instance or our data source. We will then be presented with our data stream and then our connector. So our connector will be our tenant in which we are looking at. And again, if we have multiple tenants or multiple sensors, these are what we shall be looking at. Once we've selected our data source, our data stream, and our connector, we will then need to select our time window in which we are going to conduct our search. So once we've actually performed our search, or before we're ready to perform it, we've then got the ability to add a filter. So this will reduce down the many hundreds of thousands of logs that we have to meaningful and manageable numbers to actually do an investigation. So in this case, we're going to select that the operation, and then we're going to put a contains. Now, these are all the operators that we have on here. So again, we have contains, does not contain. And again, this will then come up on the platform within the add filter function. Once a filter has been selected and created, we can create further filters after. And in this case, we're going to look at set conditional access policy. Once confirmed, we then click the blue tick sign, and we then need to select the search function. This will then present us with our logs for the filtered activity as requested. So with this feature, users can create a query or a search, and we're going to be able to narrow down results as part of our incident analysis. Now, depending on the investigation or the detection which an analyst is observing or looking at, this will depend on the type of data source and the actual logs or the data streams that we're going to be pulling out. So for example, if a user was investigating some suspicious sign-on activity, we would look at the sign-on data stream. The audit exchange may give us some information, but the sign-on logs will give us more contextual information that we're able to perform an investigation from. Now, we're going to look at some potential indicators of unauthorized access and privilege misuse that you may observe within your environment. Now, there are multiple detections that may trigger for this type of activity. However, I'm going to highlight 3 detections. So the detections that we will look at today, the first one which we will look at will be the Azure AD suspicious sign-on detection. We will then look at the detection Azure AD newly created admin account. Following, we're going to look at the Azure AD MFA disabled detection. So firstly, we're going to look at the Azure AD suspicious sign-on. So as we can see in the slides, we have a detection for a single account that is triggered on 2 Azure suspicious sign-on activities from 2 locations in the world. We have the United States of America and also Turkey. Now we can see that these have happened in a relatively short space of time compared to each other. We can also see that MFA has not been applied within these detections. So looking at this detection and investigating this in further detail, we can see within the detection that we can see the normal countries that are observed for this account. And we can also see, as stated just now, that the MFA was not applied. Now, what makes this very interesting, this particular detection, is we have a large number of countries that are observed that is normal for this account. We can also see that the device OS in this case is the same as what is normally observed. And we can also see that the browser is also similar to what's previously been observed as well. Now, we're going to look at more suspicious sign-on information shortly. However, from this page that we can see here, we're able to get a lot of information about what, who, and why this activity potentially may be occurring. Now, what makes this particular detection quite interesting is the fact that we have two elements of it. So we can see at 1022 was the initial sign-on detection for the United States of America. Now, a short while before, there were sign-on detections for Turkey. Now, we can also see that the normal countries for this account and the device OS that's observed. And again, we can see that MFA has not been applied within this detection. We're then going to go on to a newly created admin account. Now, this detection, when it triggers, is when an account has been created with administrative privileges that provide broad access to an environment. Now, these detections, when they trigger, it's imperative that they are investigated immediately. So, in this example, we can see that the account was created by this particular user. We can also see the account that was actually created. But we're also able to see that the roles granted to the account are tenant administration. Now, this will allow the account that has been created administrative rights to the tenant or to the cloud instance. Now, the next one we're going to look at will be an MFA disabled. Now, again, we can see in this detection, we have a number of accounts that have been observed. So we can see the target accounts. So the target accounts that are the accounts that have had the MFA disabled. We can also see the account that performed the activity. And we can also see the operation and also the timestamp. Now, what's particularly interesting in this example is these have all occurred on the same day and at the same time. And again, all of the strong authentication has been disabled for these 6 accounts. Now, we're going to talk about how to actually identify or how to respond once we see the M365 and Azure detections. And again, there are multiple detections that may trigger within a customer's environment. However, I'm going to highlight the same previous detections that we have already investigated. So before we talk about how to actually respond to them, again, I'm just going to cover the detections we're going to look at. So we have the Azure AD suspicious sign-on, then we're going to look at the newly created admin account, and then we're going to follow with the disabled, MFA disabled. Now, we quite often get asked about how to respond to all detections. Now, dealing with M365 and Azure detections are very similar. However, there are a number of things that I want to highlight. So the areas I want to highlight are often overlooked when responding to alerts and detections. So when we actually examine and we investigate, where possible, we need to get independent verification for the activity that has been observed. Now, we can get this from a number of places. For example, we can speak to the manager of the user or the account, or alternatively, we can speak to a department head. Now, they will likely know why detected activity has occurred. For example, has the user gone on holiday? Or have they moved department and the activities observed are for new detections or new observations for this user? Or alternatively, we can seek for locally available information. Now, this can be from security teams, maybe from HR, or we may actually have a local policy document. Now, the reason why we need to gather this independent verification is because if we were to communicate directly with the account that has caused the detection, there is a chance or a possibility that any question posed to the account may not be answered by the actual user, and in fact it could be the user that has performed the account takeover. So if I was to ask, are you on holiday? It's likely that I'm going to get a response, yes, I'm on holiday. And therefore, I'm only going to get confirmation that the user has gone on holiday and maybe not investigate this detection as well as I should. Now, we also need to look at our actions when we are responding to these detections and investigations. Now, this can take many forms, but again, a few areas that are often overlooked are the permissions that an account has been assigned. Another one, a user may have changed roles, or they may have deleted or had their permissions reassigned. Now, when suspicious activity has been observed, we need to have the ability and option for revoking sessions. Now, scenarios that could require an administrator to revoke all access for a user include compromised accounts, employee termination, and other insider threats. Now, depending on the complexity of the environment, administrators can take several steps to ensure access is revoked. Now, disabling accounts should be done at a last resort, and I will emphasize, and this should only be done when authorized to do so, ensure that the activity observed is malicious or suspicious. Other options such as resetting passwords can also be performed prior to disabling of accounts. So we'll first look at the Azure suspicious sign-on detections. So we need to look at the possible causes. So for an example, an adversary may have stolen a valid account and is using this as part of an attack. Or a user has a new device which may indicate a new device OS and or browser that has been observed. And on the previous slide, we can see the previous OSs that have been seen with this account, and we can also see the device OSs. Or alternatively, a user may be traveling for work or personal reasons. Now, it's not unusual in this day and age for users to travel with personal and or corporate devices where their accounts are logged into. Now, the actions that we're going to take for this kind of activity can vary. And again, local policy may dictate different roles of action or playbooks. Now, it's likely that a user's manager may know where or what the user is doing. They may know that the user may be on annual leave, or have they potentially traveled to a customer site, whether that's in the UK, for example, or whether it's overseas. Now, another source of information for travel can be from a travel policy. Now, some companies do have overseas travellers that are occurring during that month. Now, the next thing we need to ask about when it comes to policies are users permitted to take a corporate device when on personal travel? And again, if we are unsure of the activity that has been observed, we should revoke sessions if the activity is determined suspicious. So now we're going to look at responding effectively to an M365 and Azure detection for a newly created admin account. Again, we need to look at the possible causes. So firstly, a new legitimate administrative account was added. Now, this isn't unusual in an environment, but likely security teams and or other administrators may know that this activity is going to occur or has occurred. Or an existing administrator may add additional administrative users unintentionally. Now, not forgetting, an existing administrator may also have their account compromised, and an adversary could be using this to create additional access within an environment. Now, These, we should review the activities performed by the account since creation. Now, this includes sign-in logs and other activity logs, everything that's available to us. And these should be reviewed at the earliest opportunity. Now, this is going to highlight any areas or further indicators that an adversary has progressed further into our infrastructure. Now, whilst investigating and responding to this alert or detection, we should also be aware that investigating the account that created the admin could also indicate potential compromise. Now, again, we can disable this account if in doubt, but again, I will emphasize that this should only be done as a last resort and when authorized to do so. Now, an administrative account compromise can cause teams major issues. Now, finally, we're going to look at how to respond to an MFA disabled detection. Now, first of all, we're going to look at the possible causes. Now, an attacker may be disabling MFA on an account to bypass security controls as a means for maintaining or acquiring additional access into an environment. As shown on the example previously, having 6 MFA disabled in one environment in such a short space of time can be suspicious. Now, there may be legitimate reasons as to why this activity has occurred. Now, an administrator may have had to disable MFA for accounts used by automated processes, or alternatively, may have to have it disabled temporarily to enable access to a user who loses or potentially changes their second factor device. Now, we see this on a regular basis with customers. And again, using the example that we saw earlier, to see 6 accounts have their MFA disabled in a very short space of time is highly unusual and highly suspicious. This kind of activity, again, should be investigated at the earliest opportunity. Now, within our investigations for Azure AD and MFA disabled accounts, we should review the activity performed by the accounts that have had the MFA disabled. Now, whilst investigating and responding to this alert or detection, we should also be aware that investigating the account that has disabled the MFA should also be investigated at the earliest opportunity. And again, whilst investigating the account that performed this activity, we should be looking at all the logs that are available to us. We should be looking at the sign-in logs and all other that are available. And the same with previous. We should disable accounts if in doubt. And again, I will emphasize, disabling accounts should only be done as a last resort and only when authorized to do so. So I want to quote a statement that I make to MDR customers I engage with on a regular basis. So every detection tells a tale and has a story behind it. So whether this is a single detection or multiple detections or events that have been observed on an account or on a host, this may indicate suspicious, malicious, or alternatively, this could be authorized activity that may not have been observed previously and occurred as a one-off event. Again, as an example, using the MFA disabled on a single account wouldn't look suspicious for an account where someone has lost or bought a new phone or device. However, analysts should attempt to identify the activity at the earliest opportunity, and detections should be investigated for all detections and indicators of unauthorized access and privilege misuse within a customer's environment. Now, with that, we are at the end of the slides, and I really hope that you've learned a thing or two today and take some of these practices with you in your environment. And if you have any questions and have or not already put them through the Q&A box, please do so now. Okay, so the questions that we have so far. So the first question is, what response would you take when you see a mailbox forwarding trigger? Now, that's a good question. Now, we do see this often within customer environments. Now, the one thing that I would personally investigate at the earliest opportunity for this would actually be the emails that these are being forwarded to. You know, are these going maybe to external domains? Now, whilst investigating these, we need to look at maybe the name, the account that this is going to, or is the domain, if this is going external, is this maybe a partner company? Now, if we see that the account name appears in the forwarded email address, you know, this could still indicate that there's a potential issue here. Now, again, looking into this a little bit further, I've seen this on multiple occasions before, and this has actually highlighted, you know, a number of things, you know, for a customer. So there could be compliance issues actually related with this activity. So the way in which companies control data, you know, local governance, GDPR, for example, may actually regulate this information being retained in the country, you know, where the data was created or maybe even processed. Now, security teams should investigate these also for compromised account activity, you know, and potential data exfiltration. Now, another thing that I'd like to add on here is when we're observing this activity, especially if we've got a domain name that's external, but we may also have the account where this has come from, this could actually be someone that's setting up a forwarding rule for maybe before they leave the company, you know, or something, you know. So again, when we see the mailbox forwarding detection trigger, we need to investigate these. We need to find out why, and as well, we need to look at all the external domains or anything that's involved. So it says, you mentioned in the slide about disabling an account and had a delete strike through. So when would I delete an account as opposed to disabling? So that was good, well noticed about me putting the strike through there. Now this is a kind of interesting one here. Now, when an account is no longer logged into or used, right, this is when an account should really be reviewed for deletion. Now, the disabling of account, you know, should be, you know, that this will be ample, you know, to stop somebody maybe, you know, going into it. Now, when you actually review an account for possible deletion, you know, this should be looked at as more of a preventative action rather than a response. So, for example, if we have an account that is internet exposed and it's an easily guessable username or an email address such as administrator@domain.com, we may want to try and look at maybe changing this administrative account name to something else. However, putting this account as disabled, you know, would actually be ample. And again, any account that is deleted should be reviewed. So you have covered the suspicious sign-on detections, but we sometimes see that a user is geographically located miles apart, example, the USA and Europe. Why does this happen? So again, this goes back very, very similar to the detection that we saw previously. Now, we covered the suspicious sign-on detection. Now, There are several things that we can look at here when we're doing our investigation and analysis into what's actually occurred. Now, one of the reasons why we may actually have an account signing into two geographical locations, and again, I'll use USA and Europe as an example, could be the possibility of a VPN. Now, a VPN users nowadays on their personal devices, you know, it's pushed into us that we should use VPNs where possible, you know, for when we're on public Wi-Fi or guest Wi-Fi. Now, signing into VPNs will obviously put us in a country of our choice. Now, depending on where a user is located, they may have VPNs on their personal device selected for a particular region or area for reasons of obscurity or even just being able to access certain things. However, VPNs can be one cause of where we would see a user being logged in from two locations at the same time. Now, the second reason that we could actually see this is potentially where a mobile phone or a user's device may be actually registered in a particular country. So if we look at Telefonica as an example, that's Europe, we may have a user or a traveler that goes over to America in the example or the question just now. Now, once that user has their corporate device, they will log on from the USA. However, with their mobile phone, like a tunnel is made the way that mobile phones work, and actually the IP address of that mobile phone will actually pop up to be from where the country where that is geographically or where the HLR is actually located. Now, in the example earlier that we saw, where we saw two different accounts, the same account that was logged into in two geographically located areas, in that actual example, this was a real detection that triggered. In that one, there were multiple users geographically located around the world, and they were logging in to that account. So actually, these were genuinely multiple users logging in to a single account. So this is another possibility of where we could look at, you know, for the actual activity and why it's triggered and occurred. So we've got another question here. How does this compare to MS identity protection? Now, the actual ins and outs actually of MS identity protection, you know, this is say a completely separate product, as it were. However, with the detections that we do see within the platform, this is taking a multitude of sources. This is going to be learning what's actually normal for particular users when they perform this activity and how regular a user actually performs it. Again, as an example, using the suspicious sign-on, this will actually show us where particular users have been. Now, this is going to look at multiple instances of within the detection, you know, whether it's the IP address, the operating system, the browser. Now, again, the question that was posed just then, how does it compare to MS identity protection? What I'm going to do is I'm going to follow up with you for that question. And what I'll do is I will contact you offline with some further information. Now, we've got a few minutes before we hit the time. Now, if there are any more questions, if you'd like to put them into the Q&A box, and I'll be able to answer them. So we'll give it another minute before we wrap up. Okay, one final check. Nope. Okay, now I want to thank everybody for staying on to the end of this presentation, and I hope we've learned a thing or two today and we take some of these practices to use within our environments. Again, thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.